Okay, we're talking about popular objections, questions, queries, calumnies, lies, slanders, pick your own word, that are urged against traditional Judaism. And one of them is the idea that women are treated as inferior because they're intrinsically inferior and they're supposed to obey their husbands, and they're slaves and they're chattel, they're just property of their husbands and all the rest of that. That's the negative side. And the positive side is that since there are no significant differences between men and women that are inherent in being biological, male and female, differences of behaviors and preferences and selective labors of the son are all cultural, all culturally programmed, which then mean that the culture is putting women at a systematic disadvantage. We should correct the culture so as to make all positions open equally to all and portray all aspects of life as equally divided among between men and women, and that way you let each person find his or her own place in the tapestry. I'm not talking trans now. I'm not talking intermediary, 24 different genders. I'm not talking that stuff. That's over the roof. I don't even have to talk about that. I'm talking about stuff that goes back to the 60s, which people take for granted nowadays. Now, I want to do this in two stages. First, I want to consider the value of the arguments that are made, and then I want to take a look at verses in the Torah, the Tanakh, that describe relationships between men and women to see how they treat them. So let's start with the positive side. Really, all differences between men and women are culturally programmed. There's nothing inherent in their biology that leads them to be different in any interesting or important way. And therefore, all positions, all functions, all activities in society should be open equally to all, and they should be equally encouraged to engage in them with no discrimination between men and women. Now, understand where we're coming from. We're starting with a fact about the world, that the differences that we see are all culturally derived, cultural constructs. And from that, it follows that society should be man-woman blind. If we find out that the fact is false, then we don't have a basis for the conclusion. If we find out that the fact is false, then we have to rethink and say, well, then maybe structuring society where there are different roles isn't out of the question. So everything hangs on the fact. So let's take a look at the fact. Now, all I'm going to claim is I have some evidence that it's not clear the fact is true. Will this evidence convince a diehard that the fact is false? Maybe not. There are a lot of ways to squirm out of a conclusion, but that's not the same as supporting the opposite conclusion. So let's take a look at some of the ways in which the behaviors, capabilities, preferences of men and women are affected by things other than culture. Well, let's see. How about hormones? Hormones. Do hormones have any effect on behavior, on mentality, on emotions? No? Go read some biology. No. In fact, the feminist movement is famous for saying that men suffer from testosterone poisoning, because men have 20 times as much testosterone as women, and that seems to be responsible for a lot of their bizarre, self-destructive and generally destructive behavior. The fact that men are born with and live with 20 times as much testosterone as women doesn't mean there are inherent differences between men and women which aren't culturally programmed. Culture didn't program the testosterone. Same with estrogen for women, which has other effects on women, which men have very little of. What about brain structure and brain functioning? What about that? Do you think the brain has anything to do with behavior and emotions and reactions and perceptions? Well, two things we know about the difference in men's brains and women's brains. Something called the corpus callosum. That's a column of tissue that joins the right and left hemispheres. In women, it is larger and more developed than it is in men, systematically so. Could that possibly have an effect on the way women function, which isn't created by culture? And then, when you study how women's brains work, vis-a-vis how men's brains work, when they're dealing with something, let's say, for example, interpreting and analyzing language. So men's brains are lateralized, left and right. Linguistic processing takes place in the left. Women's brains are much less lateralized. When a woman is processing linguistic material, her brain lights up on both sides. Does that mean, men and women don't get systematically different linguistic inputs. They grow up in families. Brothers and sisters don't get different language inputs. The culture doesn't say speak this way to this one, speak that way to that one, which would organize the brain differently. It seems like women's brains just happen to deal with linguistic inputs differently from men's brains. Well, wouldn't differences in brains have something to do with the way people act, react, feel, decide, preferences, and so forth and so on? That's certainly not programmed by culture. So it does sound like the idea that everything is programmed just by culture might be a little hard to defend. Now let's take some empirical studies. This was something that Jordan Peterson has been pushing. If you believed in the fact that everything is culturally determined, then you would believe that when a culture changed its programming, you would have a change in the outcome of behavior. Well, the experiment has been tried over decades in the Scandinavian countries. There, the culture has become very men-women blind in its comic books and its literature and its videos and its exemplars in society. What happened, let's say, to choice of occupation in those countries? Did lots and lots of women become bricklayers, riveters, external excavation workers, working on the 80-story high buildings? Did lots and lots of men become child care givers or nurses? The men-women division of occupation is higher. It's higher in the Scandinavian countries than it is in the world average. That's not the outcome that the position predicts. The position predicts that since everything is culturally determined, when you change the culture, you'll change the outcomes. And if you make the culture egalitarian, then the outcomes will become egalitarian. The exact opposite happened. Well, something seems to be wrong there. Something seems to be wrong. You have a fact. You make a prediction, and the prediction turns out to be the opposite of what you expect. You at least ought to lose some confidence that you're right. Shouldn't just trumpet as obviously right. Should think again. Maybe exhibit some doubt. Then there was a study done on Kibbutzim in this country. In the 1920s, there were communist kibbutzim. The communist movement was very strong here. Until, I don't know if they still do, but the labor movement used to start its conventions by singing the Internationale. Internationale, the national anthem of Russia. The kibbutzim were run like this. There were children's houses where the children were housed. They did not know who their parents were. They were unidentified. There was no family structure whatsoever. All the books showed women driving tractors, and men doing daycare, and vice versa. It was completely man-woman blind. And then the assumption was, in our closed community, in our closed subculture, the children will divide themselves up according to their own preferences and their own desires, and you'll have a roughly equal distribution of men and women in the various occupations of the kibbutz. Well, for one generation, it was working in that direction. And after that, it reverted to the same division between men and women in occupations as on the outside society. Well, that was a puzzle because, again, this was not what the position predicted. Now, there's a sociologist, I'm not making this up, his name is Lionel Tiger. I think it's South African, so you can imagine why that was. He did a study. He went around to the Kibbutzim and interviewed people to find out why, if they're being raised in a culture where there's no cultural input to dividing up men and women into different occupations, why it is that on the kibbutz the division is very strong. I remember one interview that he had with a woman, which I think was very telling. She said, the big difference between the kibbutz on the one hand and the outside society on the other hand is that in the kibbutz, all labor is valued. All labor is valued. No such thing as high quality or highly appreciated labor, like being a great football player, or being a great scientist, or being a great author, and low, like driving a bus or driving a cab, or working on being a sanitary engineer. There's no such thing. Whatever you do on the kibbutz, you can be the kibbutz economist and the kibbutz bus driver. Everything is equally appreciated and honored. In particular, in the outside society, women's work is not valued. The fact that a woman makes a home and keeps a home and takes care of the children is not highly valued. You don't get prestige from that. You don't get honor from that. You don't get respect from that. Sort of taken for granted and treated as something of no particular value. Well, if you want to be honored, if you want to be respected, you're not going to volunteer for work where you don't want to treat it that way. But on the kibbutz, everyone's honored and respected for what they do. If I am a mother, if I take care of my children, if I take care of the children in the schools, if I'm in the hospital, take care of them, if I'm honored for that, she said, why shouldn't I do what I like? You men seem to get a bang out of going into the fields and picking up 100-pound bales of hay with pitchforks in the blazing sun and coming home with your muscles aching, full of sweat. That does something for you. You feel like a real man. If I do that, I feel terrible. I don't feel accomplished. I don't feel like I'm accomplishing anything. I see a child growing. I see a child developing. I make a contribution to his development. That makes me feel like I'm doing something. Since I'm going to be honored anyway, why shouldn't I do what I like? I think it's a very powerful statement. Meaning, as a woman, typically, I like doing this more than I like doing that. Don't show me pictures of women picking up bales of hay. That doesn't do anything for me. I don't identify with them. So with all the pictures and all the examples and all the literature, the natural differences in their preferences still survive. If so, it's more of an example, more evidence that it's not culturally programmed. Furthermore, now disciplines like sociology and anthropology go through cycles. So what they said in a particular cycle, a particular moment in the cycle, isn't all that reliable, because when the wheel turns, they may change their minds. But in the 50s and 60s and 70s, when I grew up, sociology and anthropology was all about vast cultural differences between cultures, different values, different practices, and a tremendous world variety. That was the state of the art then. Since the 80s, it's tipped the other way. Now they're talking about cultural universals. One of the universals is the division of labor in societies, as far back as history goes, and as far as we can, survey. The divisions of labor are almost identical in different societies, which means that if it really is a matter of culture, it's very peculiar that there aren't any differences in cultures in this regard. Cultures span different times, different geographies, different types of economies, different kinds of political organization, but not this. Not this. The children are taken care of by the females, and hard and difficult and dangerous jobs are done by the men, right? If it's really cultural, why didn't that vary when so many other cultural things vary? So with all of this evidence, I think it's very hard to make the case we know that it's only cultural. Aha. So it's hard to make the case we know it's only cultural. Then you can't make the case generally that differences of roles in culture is necessarily prejudicial. Because maybe the differences in roles in culture fits the inherent differences between men and women. Maybe so. Now, maybe not, but maybe so. So to say that if you distinguish men's and women's roles in your culture, you're automatically disadvantaging has no basis anymore. You might make a case in detail, assuming you knew what men and women are well enough, which is always a false assumption for today. You knew what they were and you saw the division. You could say that this type of division disadvantages. And the final point that I want to make before we start a discussion is, even if you thought it disadvantaged, why would you think necessarily disadvantaged women? Maybe it disadvantages men. Maybe it disadvantages both. Who's to say who's more disadvantaged? Why then would you put it down to patriarchy? All of this rhetoric, all of this politics is based on no solid foundation. That's all my first point is meant to say. Yeah, questions? Yeah.
To go back to the point with the kibbutz, you mentioned that there was essentially no honor system with respect to your occupation in the kibbutz, right?
I didn't use the word honor.
You didn't use honor.
Not once. We have a recording. You can check it. So, but I did talk about prestige. I did talk about respect.
Okay, so I'll rephrase.
Yeah.
Prestige. There was no prestige with respect to one's occupation at that. I mean, within that kibbutz, and basically.
I'm sorry. I said the opposite. I said every labor has prestige. They all have prestige.
Okay. They all have prestige to the same amount.
That's
right. Okay. So my point being, to that extent, you could make the point that it's rather the opposite. That culturally it does matter. That culture does play a significant factor, because in that type of society where there is no prestige taken into account with your occupation, people will do whatever they want. That's correct.
Right.
But in our society where prestige is taken into account, culturally we're forced based on the prestige and the honor we get. Prestige, you get more money, right?
Yeah, but think of what you're saying.
It does have much more significant effect.
But think of what you're saying. On the contrary, the evidence would require you to prove that. If, when no prestige difference exists, you have the division of labor between men and women, then why do you tie it to prestige when there is prestige? Why do you say prestige is what does it? Maybe it's the same thing that does it when there's no prestige. Who says the prestige is doing it when you do have prestige? That you have to show. Once you know that it occurs without the prestige, you have no right to just assume that when there is prestige, that's what's doing it. That's science. And you find out the effect without the cause, then you claim in other cases this is what causes it. You have to show that, because you have the effect sometimes without the cause. Yeah.
So I think broadly speaking, what you said before, that it disadvantages or advantages both sides, probably seems like what's going to be the truth in the end. But what one side can kind of claim out is that among the people who are the biggest winners, the people who accrue all the benefits, who have the most power, who run things, for most of history, that's 100% men. So the 1% of the 1% in this side of the gender span seems to win the golden prize every single time. And I think that's ultimately what they want to boil it down to.
Well, I guess it would depend in part on what you call the golden prize. Does life expectancy matter? Is it a relevant factor? Do people want to live longer, typically? Well, life expectancy, so as long as we've had records, women have a greater life expectancy than men.
Accounting for childbirth as well?
Taking everything into account, they have a longer lifespan than men. We see, because as many women that die in childbirth, lots more men die in war. They kill each other and kill themselves, right? And in motorcycle racing, and in sniffing and injecting things, and doing all the other stupid, irresponsible things that men do. So men just kill themselves, right? So something, and if that's culturally affected, then the culture's pushing men to kill themselves. Then that's not a benefit. That seems to me to be a big loss. But more than that, I have a section in my book where I talk about the superior quality of life that religious Jews enjoy over other ethnic and social groups. And the objection has been raised that if you talk about the average amount of money earned per person, you'll find other groups that have a much higher average. Now, I make the point there that if you're going to compare relative quality of life, you'd better do it with respect to values that both cultures hold in common. Because if one culture holds excellence in archery as a very high value, and they invest a lot in it, and another culture doesn't care about archery, you wouldn't say that because the first culture has better archers than the second, it has a higher quality of life. The second culture doesn't want to have archers. You want to talk about comparative quality of life, what you want to do is ask how well two societies are succeeding in realizing a common value. Now the question is this: is it a Jewish value to have as high an income as possible? Is that a Jewish value? The answer is no. We understand very well that there's such a thing as enough, and having more than that hurts, doesn't help. We have a lot of literature on that. In fact, when we ask for God's physical sustenance, the word we use every time is sab'enu, which means make us satisfied. Make us satisfied with your goodness. Now, that being the case, the fact that another culture has a higher per capita income doesn't necessarily mean they have more of something that we both want. Read about, for example, the lives of people who win the lottery. The majority of people who win the lottery, their lives are ruined. Their lives are ruined. Don't believe me? Look it up. Google it, and you'll find out. You win $2 million, you'll never know whether you have another friend. Maybe he's just hanging around with you because he wants your money. Maybe he's offering you a scheme because he wants to make a profit. Maybe he's using the association with you to get something for somebody else, and then somebody else will give something to him. You lose your friends. There's competition in the family. I was just going with a taxi cab driver, and I mentioned this to him, and he said, "You don't have to tell me. My grandfather won the lottery. His wife deserted him. All of his children ended up divorced, and he lost all the money and died penniless. And he won the lottery." So maybe the fact that we don't have that particular feature is because we don't value that feature. If we don't value it, you can't use it for a comparison of comparative quality of life. So when you talk about the things that they say that they get, if you're talking about us, vis-a-vis us, I'm thinking someone is criticizing us, right? The question is whether they're achieving it in terms of things that I think everybody wants stable marriages. I think everybody wants to avoid addictions. I think everybody wants to avoid violence. Take a look at the statistics. I have them in my book. It's overwhelmingly different. So I think that when you talk about winning big, then the question is, what are they winning? And whether they aren't being very narrow-minded about what counts as winning big. Power. Do powerful people have happier lives than people who aren't powerful? That's not obvious. So if you get power, maybe you're being disadvantaged, not advantaged. These things are very, very superficially argued. There's a lot more that has to be taken into account. Yeah.
Why is it that religious Jews don't value is it that we value just specifically enough?
Why is it valued just enough? So I'll tell you, this is a very interesting point. First of all, while you're here, I recommend that you go around to different families for Shabbos or for activities, see how people live. You talk about the poverty line in America? No one would live like the way we do. No one. 12 kids in a 3-bedroom apartment? What do you mean? There's the parents and the boys and the girls. 7 boys, 5 girls, and no problem. Nobody's lying on the stoop in the morning drunk. No one's shooting up. You don't have suicides. Why not? Why not? If you're living in poverty, and poverty is supposed to be the cause, because poverty is the excuse, because he grew up in poverty, you can't expect better behavior. And therefore, you have to excuse everything he does. Why isn't poverty doing that to us? There was a study done in this country, probably 6-7 years ago now, of the various different subpopulations, and they found out that in the ultra-Orthodox community, people live longer, healthier, and happier lives. That was shocking, because if you have such a low level of income, that shouldn't happen. It shouldn't happen. It should drive you to despair. It should drive you to desperate measures, to addiction, and so forth and so on. Maybe there's something in the culture that enables us to thrive under those conditions. Now, there's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, the more property you have, the more worries you have, the more preoccupation you have in caring for your property. Now, it depends upon what kind of person you are. If you find caring for your property fulfilling, if you find it inspiring, then maybe that could contribute to a real sense of happiness. But my goodness gracious, what kind of a purpose? You are the caretaker for your property? You're a success when your garden grows well? I mean, what kind of life is that? There's a lot of folk wisdom that's true. The Gemara brings it also. But a lot of things that people take for granted that isn't. And one is the famous, ubiquitous adage in American English, time is money. Oh no. Time is life. If you trade your life for money, you're making a bad trade. I used to wonder with Bill Gates, when he had $20 billion, why does he get out of bed in the morning? What is he doing? What is he accomplishing? Then he had 30 billion and 40 billion and 50 billion. Just more zeros, more numbers. 60 billion. When you get to 60 billion, he started giving away money. I thought, aha, he's had a very important insight. You can't make a life out of making money, other than you are a skeleton human being. If I could use my money to really change the lives of other people and improve the lives of other people, so that's already something that's worthwhile doing. He graduated to a much higher level of human consciousness. What drove him before was competition and prestige, the prestige of having more money, but competition and prestige is a very low-level expression of humanity. What he discovered is there are things that are more important, and yes, even talk of happiness, they'll make you happier. They'll make you happier than you could be by simply accumulating more money. So again, I think you have to observe this from the inside to see what people do with their money, what people think about the purpose of the money. I have a friend who came here from America. In America, he opened 2 businesses. I think one was jewelry and the other was a travel agency. And he retired. He came here with his family, and he was spending his time in yeshiva learning. Then his children got old enough to get married, and that's a considerable outlay of money. So he went back to work, and while they were getting married, he was working. And then when they finished marrying off his children, he went back to learning. My work serves me, not I serve my work. I don't measure myself by my work. My work is something that serves what my life goals are. My life goals are moral, spiritual, social, political, family, community. Those are my life goals. So I think that once you realize it's absorbed into that kind of culture, I'll tell you one more thing about this. The allure of the material is something which you have to be careful of. This I heard from my mother-in-law, who lived through the Depression. In 1929, they had the Depression in America. There were people who committed suicide. So far as I know, by the way, they were all men. Isn't culture programming them to be successful? They were all men who committed suicide. They jumped off buildings. Why? Because they lost their money. Now, the following reflection was recorded at that time. These men who jumped off the building in 1929 because they lost their money, if in 1927 they had lost a child, would they have committed suicide? Did you ever hear of a parent committing suicide because they lost a child? Even an only child. Never heard of it, right? Now, if you had asked him in 1927, what do you love more, your money or your children? What would he say? Children. Is it right? When he jumps off the building, he leaves his children orphans. If he really loved his children, he would stay in the world to help them, to do something for them. But no, he could live without a child. He can't live without his money. The money has eaten away his ego. It's taken over his identity, and he doesn't even know it. Now, with this insight that I heard from my mother-in-law, I was able to explain a pasuk with a chazal that we say every day, twice a day, and maybe more often if you're a aficionado. Shalom HaKadosh Baruch Hu, b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, v'chol me'otecha. Love God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your money. Doesn't all your money sound like an anticlimax, a kind of irrelevant afterthought? If you're loving God with all your heart, with all your soul, why do you have to be told to love God with all your money? Because you might not know that you're not doing it. You might not be aware that you're not doing it. You might not be aware of the fact that your money has eaten away at your ego to the extent that you're not leaving your whole heart and soul for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is what her reflection brought home to me. So what the Torah is telling you is, examine yourself. What are you using your money for? I have a 2020 Porsche. Guess what? My next door neighbor bought a 2023. I'm down. I got to get a 2023 also. Otherwise, I'm down. It's going to cost me another 20 hours a week of work. It's worth it. It's worth it. So I can walk out when he walks out and walk out with the same haughty smile on my face. I have a 2023 also. You're not bigger than I am. What kind of life is that? What kind of life is that? That a life that's going to make you really happy? You think about what the human spirit is capable of. It's a sad, pitiable fact that people live on that kind of level. It's just a little illustration of where we're coming from when we say, Sab'enu, make us satisfied with what we have. So we won't. There's another statement of Chazal. My Rebbe Zatzal used to talk about this. Yesh lamana ratzam asayim. Yesh lama'asayim ratzam arba meos. Person who has 100 wants 200. Person who has 200 wants 400. It means the more you have, the poorer you are. Because the more you're missing, the more you're lacking, the more you don't have. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. How is it possible that Bill Gates at 20 billion didn't say enough, stop, do something else. Look at art, go water skiing. No, we got to go from 20 billion to 30 billion, 30 billion to 40 billion. What's going on there? The money has eaten away at its humanity. So I think that when you appreciate things like that, then you study the other sources that we have on money, you'll see that the idea of having as much money as you can, and having high per capita income of people that you could possibly have, is not the key to the real values of life. Okay, we're all together? Okay, that was the philosophical side. Now let's start with the psukim. Let's take out the blue books, and I'll show you a few things. Thank you very much. what we're going to do now borders in style on what we did the first few days. Here, it's misunderstandings of what the Torah says, which leads people to voice their critique. And what we have to do is just correct the understanding of what the Torah means. We're on page 13. Yeah, this is Bereshit chapter 2, verse 18. Famous verse. Hashem, God, said, "It is not good that man be alone. I will make him a helper corresponding to him." Oh, there it is, black and white, boys and girls. The man is the center, the man is the purpose, the man is the value, but how can he manage alone? You know, you need somebody to help him, work for him, do things for him, so that he can do the really important things. So he makes a helper for him, right? Now, uncharacteristically, let's look carefully at the words. The words say, "It is not good that man be alone." It does not say, "It is not good for man to be alone." It doesn't say that. Now, I know that in university they didn't train you to think carefully about words, but try to think of the difference. What is the difference between what it is written in the book, "It is not good that man be alone," versus, "It is not good for man to be alone"? What's the difference?
When you say it's not good for man to be alone, you're implying that this is for man. Like the implication is that the purpose is for the man. When it says it is not good that man is alone, it's a general statement. Man is not the central subject of the statement, but rather a proponent of the grander scheme.
Okay, I wouldn't say it exactly the words as you said it, but I think that's the basic idea. You see what?
When you say that man, you're saying man is alone. You're saying it's not good that man be alone. You're saying man is alone.
Oh, it doesn't mean that man is as opposed to somebody else. Another. No, it's just right. Okay, right.
Man is alone.
That's right.
Yeah.
And what it would mean if you say it's not good for a man to be alone?
It's not good for man to be alone. It's saying that it's not good for it. He's not alone. But it's not good for him to be alone.
Okay, I think maybe you're saying this. I mean, it's heard clearly, but I think you're saying similar thing to what they're saying. Yeah.
I think it's more like when you say it's not good for man to be alone, you're saying the woman was created for man, versus when you're saying that man be alone, it's more saying in the general sense of the world, in the general sense of the balance of nature and everything. It's not good for man to be alone because he needs something to balance him out.
Okay, you changed the vocabulary, but you're right. Okay, let me explain now what you all have in common. It's not good for man to be alone means man lacks something. It's not good for him. He's not in a good condition, so he needs something. Then the implication is, if she's created for him, so it won't be bad for him anymore. The question is, what's for him? That would justify the complaint, but that's not what's written. As the three of you said, it's not good that man be alone means there's a state of affairs called man being alone. That's a state of affairs, like you said, for the whole world. It's a world with one man in it and nothing else, and no other people in it, right? That state of affairs is a bad state of affairs. Who's it bad for? No clue. No commitment, no implication. It's just bad. It's bad that man be alone. Why is it bad? No implication whatsoever. So that at least cuts the wind out of the critique, which says she was made for him. She was made to correct a world which has a man alone. A man alone in the world is bad, but a man alone together with a woman is good. That's the world's status changes when the woman is created. That makes a gigantic difference in what the verse is saying. Yeah.
I hear that. That sounds right. But just to throw something out, is a way to read that man be alone, because ultimately she is part of man as well, that it not be good that man remains as like one piece?
Here, woman is being created, so the woman isn't on the
Being
page.
created from him.
Okay, even so. The verse says there is man, there isn't woman, and the situation with man alone, whatever that means, is a bad situation. And the situation will be better when man isn't alone, there is woman in the picture.
And it's not saying that like the fundamental human shouldn't be completely solitary in itself.
Oh, I don't
instead be divided up.
I don't know. Either way, what difference does it make? The point is that it makes no difference to the complaint. The dividing up isn't to give him a present.
Well,
It's to change the structure of the world.
But I think for the four, I think it's another, even if you say it's four, it's also against the complaint, because it says that the one who it's for was also for the woman because she was a part of him.
But none of that is in the text, number
Fair.
one. So you can't expect them to do that. But it's still not true, because the one that's mentioned here is man. Whoever that man is, situation is, if you say for him, whoever and whatever that is bad for him, and that's better for him, so she's made for him, the way he said it. It's exactly the implication, right? And that's the implication that they take, and it's dead wrong. In the words of the text, it's dead wrong.
And not good, that is just suboptimal.
Yes, okay, yeah. You want to say something?
No.
Oh, you said it before, yeah.
Being that God is aware that man should not be alone and there should be woman, why not make man and woman simultaneous?
Yeah, okay, that's an interesting question. God does many things. This is a very general feature. God does very many things so that we should learn from them. That we should learn what his values are and what his purposes are. He says to Moses twice, because of the crime of the golden calf and the crime of the spies, he says, I've had it with them, I'll destroy them, and I'll make a new nation out of you. And Moses says, listen, I have counter considerations to offer. And he gives these counter considerations, and each time God backs off, right? But God knew the counter considerations before Moses gave them. So why did he just skip the threat? Because this way we learn what God cares about. We learn the severity of the crime, and we learn that these are the kinds of things that can count in favor of us when there's a severe crime. All these processes are meant for us to observe them and learn from them. Yes?
About that, we know that like God can't be changed. Isn't Moses arguing with God and God backing off, not changing him, or not like changing his mind?
Okay, this is. I'll answer this. We have a few minutes, and this is it's a question that everybody asks. Let's go through a few possibilities. You pray to God for something. Are you trying to change God? Right now he's disposed not to give it to me, but if I pray, maybe I can change his mind, and I'll be able to get it. So isn't prayer trying to change God's mind? Now let's push it a little further. God promises reward for doing mitzvos and punishment for doing averos. So, when I do a mitzvah, am I causing God's mind to give me a reward? And when I do a transgression, I'm causing God's mind to give me a punishment?
Well, I feel it's a little different, because it's not like God said that I'm not going to do this for you, and you're trying to change it, and like you're asking him to change his mind. It's God said he would like make a new nation out of Moses, but Moses is kind of directly arguing.
Yeah, but hold on. So now, if you're going to tell me that in the case of prayer, it's not changing his mind, why can't arguing also not be changing his mind? What's the kernel? The kernel is this: when I say, maybe God doesn't want to give it to me, but if I pray, he'll give it to me. You have to picture God as having a forked intention in his mind. God's decision, his principle is, if he doesn't pray, he doesn't get it, and if he does pray, he does get it. That's his one single principle. Now, if he doesn't pray and he doesn't get it, and then he prays and gets it, did any change occur in God? Not at all. It's just the principle is, if this happens, this is a result. If this happens, this is a result. That principle remains exactly the same. So all of these interactions, so now, if there's no counter-argument made, if there's no appeal made to me, then this is the outcome. If there's an appeal made to me, then this will be the outcome. Nothing changes. So at no point in time are we contemplating that God is changing. We're not trying. You're right. We don't tolerate the idea of changing God. And none of these cases imply that. Yeah.
I want to ask about the time in which the phrasing of the Torah is said. Because it says that man be alone. So already, it's kind of more of a descriptive. It's like describing like a fact.
Yeah, because man was created already.
Right. And to be, it's adding like a different time to the
No. In English, all it says is the condition of a solitary man is a bad condition.
Right.
That's all. That's all. Doesn't mean anything more than that. Now, the oral tradition says, if you look carefully at the Hebrew, it says it'll make him a helper. Now your soft English translates corresponding to him. But keneged means opposite. Keneged means opposing. And you think to yourself, a helper opposing him? And the answer is, when you'll be married, you'll know what that means. I didn't say that. Don't quote me. I didn't say. No. But the Midrash, which is also part of Jewish teaching, has a very peculiar statement here. It says, if he deserves it, she'll help him. And if he doesn't deserve it, she'll be against him. What does that imply? Put on your logic thinking cap. The man might deserve it or might not deserve it. It means if he deserves it, he's good. If he doesn't deserve it, he's bad. But the woman, if he deserves it, she helps him and she's good. And if he doesn't deserve it, she opposes him and she's good. So she's good either way. He might be good or bad, but she's good either way. Now, do these words sound to you as if the woman is second class, second rate, doesn't sound like it to me. And the last thing here is, but she's a helper. That's terrible. If A's helping B, then obviously A is inferior to B. Really? Is that what you think? Is that the way you live? Besides the fact that it's utterly vicious and inhuman. Pity the poor psychiatrist. Guy comes in, Doc, before I go to sleep, I got to wash my hands 103 times for washing compulsion. Help! Save me! Don't worry, I'll help you. I'll save you. Pity the poor psychiatrist. He's just helping people. He's just a helper for other people. Isn't that terrible? What a terrible life. What an inferior life. Because all you do is helping people. And teachers are improving the understanding and knowledge of their students. They're helping the other students develop their understanding. Pity all the poor teachers, and so forth and so on. And then, as a final thought, you, I guess, expect someday to be paid for what you do. Or to have a job and earn a living, right? Why would anybody pay you to do something? Why would they do that? Because you're earning more money for them than they're paying you. Otherwise, they're not going to pay you. So, you're helping them, aren't you? So everybody's a toady. Everyone's inferior. Everyone has a terrible life because everybody's helping everybody else. From a Jewish point of view, helping, what is the Creator doing all the time other than supporting and preserving and giving and helping us? From a Jewish point of view, to think that being a helper is inferior would mean that God is inferior. That sounds like a wrong conclusion. One verse.